With the government out of control and our liberties dwindling, did you ever want to get away from it all and start over with a bunch of like-minded patriots? Create a new American experiment? Well, 200 people have already ponied up the money to do just that in the Idaho Panhandle. What could possibly go wrong? I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Stephen Green and Tammy Bruce, who's sitting in for the peripatetic Bill Whittle. It's called Citadel. And if all goes well, more than 3,500 liberty-seeking, sharpshooting, founding father lovers will live in and around this walled fortress, where AR-15 ownership is required. Each citizen musters for militia maneuvers at least quarterly, and weapons must be carried when you go downtown. Now, Stephen Green, do you think this is more like the voyage of the Mayflower or a new Branch Davidian compound?
Oh, no, Branch Davidian. I think that's unfair. I think these are real Americans who have some real concerns. And the fact that they're forming their own militia, you know, in the Second Amendment, it says a well-regulated militia is vital to the state. Listen, the militia used to mean you and your neighbors being responsible enough to own firearms and drill together so that you could defend your neighborhood, your city, or your state, or your country. This is how we did things in this country, and it's a shame we don't still do that. On the other side of it, this idea of building a walled city reminds me very much of Latin America. It reminds me of the Third World, where the rich would build their fortresses because you never know when the rabble would get roused and start storming and pillaging and whatnot. And this is kind of the middle class version of that, and I think it's really sad that folks feel it necessary to do this kind of thing. I am glad, however, that they're still responsible enough to do it when the need arises.
Maybe around the perimeter of those walls, they should set up porta potties in case the Occupy Wall Street movement folks show up. Tammy Bruce, no homeowners association, no government bureaucrats enforcing busybody regulations in this city on a hill, but a 13-part voluntary Patriot agreement requires residents to fire a rifle and handgun with 70% accuracy tested annually. Failure to comply with the agreement could get you hauled before the arbitration board and potentially ejected from the community. Is this just another in a long line of utopian communal experiments doomed to failure?
Look, it is slightly ironic when this is being established because of arguments now in the country that we're being too controlled by the powers that be. Whenever there's a dynamic of if you fail to comply, I'm expecting the Borg to come in at some point, you know, because everyone ultimately will be the same. So it is problematic. I also don't see, we were talking, you know, you talk about those cocktail parties in Washington. When everybody's the same and everybody does have the same interests, it's not real interesting. You know, I live in Los Angeles, and I complain about, and we all complain about Hollywood and the nature of the left coast, but it's actually kind of interesting when you're around people who aren't necessarily like you. I like the challenge of that. This sounds like it might get really boring really fast, and I have a feeling that there would be a lot of people inclined to not comply. So that would be interesting to see.
Yeah, get a bunch of liberty lovers together and tell them to do what they're told.
Yeah,
the town of Citadel
exactly.
will actually include a weapons factory that makes AR-15s and semi-automatic handguns. You can order them now on their website. Residents are required to stock 1,000 rounds of ammo and enough food to survive for a year for their whole family. Twice a year, everyone gets mustered for a town defense drill. Steve, what makes folks want to do something like this? I mean, have things gone that irredeemably bad in our God-blessed land?
No, but we can see that we're heading down that path. We're heading down that trail. General societal collapse is it's a real threat when you're sitting on $16 trillion worth of debt. You're adding another trillion to it every year, and absolutely no way to fix it. So I can see that over the horizon. I don't necessarily agree that what they're doing is the right way to approach it. I think Tammy has a good point here about not just the boredom, but about the soul-numbing human uniformity. One of the things I miss about living in San Francisco is just the sheer variety of people. Your eyes were entertained, not just your brain. It was a wonderful thing. So is this thing going to work? Well, America has had a lot of communes over the centuries, and they pretty much all end up as failure. But I think this is a sign of the time, and it is a sign of the third worldization of a great country.
Well, Tammy, the preamble of the Patriot Agreement at Citadel says that residents, quote, covenant of our free will and do pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to defend one another and Jefferson's rightful liberty. Apparently Jefferson's going to live there. Anyway, defined as unobstructed action according to our will within limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others, end quote. What do you think the journalists and celebrities and politicians will say about this around the pool in their gated communities?
Well, you know, at least even within that framework, they're still not pledging necessarily to something other than the Constitution. That sounds like a real kind of usurper dynamic where I've already made my pledge to the founders and to the country and to the Constitution. I'm not ready to give up on anything. And I think, you know, look, if you're going to make a lot of money being a celebrity, that's fine, and they enjoy their privacy and their isolation. And we will work to make sure that this country allows everybody to have a good time and have a life that best suits them. This clearly is not an answer. And yet I have probably 1,000 rounds of ammunition, and I still make that pledge, of course, to the Constitution and to the country and to my community. This is a little extreme, and they better, I think, probably should be more concerned about what authentic conservatives are saying, maybe necessarily than what Hollywood might think.
Well, I can appreciate the motivation of folks who want to return to a time when liberty, freedom from government coercion, was considered a God-given birthright. I understand those who fear government run amok and the threat it poses to our ability to defend ourselves against tyranny. However, as a student of the Constitution, I'm afraid this latest experiment is doomed to fail, and not for the reason you might think. You see, Citadel's Patriot Agreement can be amended only by universal consent of the governed. Back in the 1700s, under the Articles of Confederation, we needed the consent of all 13 colonies to amend that charter, and that's what forced the framers literally to step outside of the existing framework to draft a new constitution. And in any case, as Tammy said, I'm not retreating behind the walls of any doomsday bunker because I'm not ready to abandon the fight for liberty here in our own community, my own commonwealth, and my own country. How about you? For Tammy Bruce, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew here at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.